Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Catherine and this is Raspberry Reads. I'm doing my November wrap up for you, and I read 7 books in November, which was more than I have read in the past few months, but as I've mentioned before on my channel, I often have a lot of books on the go, and so I didn't start all of these books in November, I merely finished them in November. The first book that I finished was Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I listened to Wolf Hall on audiobook and I gave it 4 stars. So Wolf Hall follows Thomas Cromwell and Cardinal Wolsey during the reign of Henry VIII and the formation of the Church of England. It's clear from listening to Wolf Hall that Hilary Mantel put a lot of time and dedication and research into this book, and so from that perspective it's a very impressive piece of historical fiction. I also enjoyed the fact that the characters were really well formed and seemed historically accurate to me, although I must admit that the Tudor period is not my area of expertise. However, this book is too long. It was a 24-hour audiobook, and I do remember good big chunks of it, but I couldn't tell you, the full narrative. It was just too long. And if I'm perfectly honest, I did find it a little bit dull. I enjoy reading about the Tudor period, but it's not a particular area of interest for me in terms of history. So I would say if you are a really big fan or enthusiast of the Tudor era, the history of the Church of England, or the history of the Catholic Church in England, then I would say Wolf Hall is a great book to read. But if you were, and also if you are an enthusiast for reading dense historical fiction, very detail focused historical fiction, then Wolf Hall is probably a book to check out. Otherwise, if you tend to read sort of light-hearted or loosely based historical fiction, it's probably not the book for you. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm sort of mixed feelings on Wolf Hall. I can't decide if I'm going to keep going in the series. They're just so long. I have no intention of picking them up anytime soon. My father-in-law gave me I think it's a set of the second and third books, so that's sitting on my bookshelf, but I honestly have no intention of picking it up anytime soon. So that's Wolf Hall. 4 stars because it was, superbly executed, but it's not a 5-star read for me, and I definitely wouldn't read it again. The second book that I finished in November was Wakenhyrst by Michelle Pave, and this was an ebook. And I would give this a strong 4 stars, so sort of like 4.5 if we're doing half marks. And the only reason I knocked off the half mark is because it was a little bit long. So Wakenhyrst is set in the 1930s, I believe. I might be getting that wrong. Historical fiction, is set in England, and it's all about this manor house called Wakenhyrst, and a mystery that happens there. And it's so dark and atmospheric, and the characters are fantastic. Yeah, I really enjoyed my reading experience of Wakenhyrst. It has a lot to do with family dynamics and family secrets, and it also has to do with religious iconography, and kind of like um, the complications that arise when you have a close-knit community with one person sort of holding all the power in that community. Yeah, it was a really cool book to read. As I said, it was a little bit long, but I am still thinking about Wakenhyrst quite a lot, and so it is the perfect book to read at this time of year, and it is one that I would wholeheartedly recommend to you all. The third book that I read was Gild by Raven Kennedy, and I listened to this on audiobook and I gave it 3 stars. So this is another one of those romantasy books that's quite popular right now, and I would say that the writing is pretty subpar even for romantasy, sort of worse writing than Sarah J. Maas, I would say. And what I did enjoy about Gild is that it was an interesting premise. So it follows the the chosen concubine, I guess we could say, the favorite of King Midas, and she is a gilded woman and has particular powers, and it's all about sort of the adventures that she goes on. It is part of a series as well, so this is just sort of setting up the series where you find her in how she came to be in King Midas's possession, and then when she needs to go on an adventure, what happens there. I would say that the depictions of sex in this book are unsettling. There are depictions of rape, so that's just a trigger warning for you. I did not enjoy those scenes. I thought that they could have been written a little bit more tactfully. So that detracted from my enjoyment of Gild, and I won't be continuing the series. So a little bit of a letdown for Gild by Raven Kennedy. The fourth book that I read was The Woman Who Climbed Trees by Smriti Ravindra. And I listened to this on audiobook and I gave it 3 stars. And this book was so disappointing because the first half of the book was fantastic. You follow the protagonist, who's a young woman and she's about to be married, and you follow her as she leaves her family home and then goes to live in her husband's home, and her husband ends up living away. She moves to, and eventually moves to Kathmandu in Nepal. And the thing that's interesting about this book is I don't know very much about Indian history, and I don't know very much about Nepalese history, and so I didn't know while listening to the audiobook what time period we were talking about. I thought, based on the dialogue and the scene setting, that it was from maybe the 1880s, 1890s. No. This was from the like 1980s, 1990s. So very recent. And as I said, I enjoyed the first half of the book following the main character, and then you switch to different perspectives looking at a woman who is connected to the father, and then you look at the children of this woman as they're living in Nepal, and looking at the Nepalese democratic revolution, I believe, in the 1990s, early 2000s. So that was really fascinating because I've never read anything about that time period before, and I really connected to I can't remember her name. Was it Mina? It might have been Mina. The initial character. I really connected to her, and then it just sort of all fell apart in the end, and I just really wasn't interested in it, which was a bit of a letdown. So it was a strong 3 stars for having multi-generational and multiple perspectives, all about strong women and the role of women in Indian and Nepalese society. Um, and so from that perspective, I would recommend it, but just in terms of the execution of the book, it didn't quite flow how I would like to. I was sad that I left one of the characters behind. I would have liked it to be more linear. Okay, so moving on to the fifth book that I read. This is Restoration by Rose Tremain. I had not come across Rose Tremain before, but she is a prolific writer of historical fiction. And I listened to Restoration on audiobook and I gave it 5 stars. It's not the best thing that I've ever read or listened to, but it was such an enjoyable performance. I was hooked from the moment it started all the way through to the end of the book. So, as the name suggests, this is set in the Restoration in England, and so this is when you have Charles II, I think, Charles the First, Charles the Second, back on the throne after the Revolution, in the Civil War rather. And what I liked about this audiobook is that it was real performance. So the narration was strong and really characterful, and also it had music. So in between the little like, story points, there was music from the Restoration period, which was not good, and it was quite startling if you were falling asleep, and then all of a sudden this like weird lute or something comes on, but it was still an added experience, that it almost felt like a play. And so, from that perspective, I really enjoyed listening to Restoration. And it follows one main character, who's male, his name escapes me, but it follows his life related to being a physician, or surgeon, I guess. Yeah, surgeon, and how he becomes favored in the court and then loses favor. And yeah, I think it's actually part of a series, or at least a duology. So if you like historical fiction, then I 100% recommend Restoration by Rose Tremain. All right, next up we have The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. So I read this as a physical book, and I read it for my book club. And this was, again, a solid 4 stars. So it's a beautiful idea. So it's a long sort of journey, an unexpected journey. And the whole book is set up almost as if it's going to be sort of a saga like the Odyssey, or like Sinbad is also cited within the book. So this journey that the characters set out on that takes unexpected turns, and they meet unexpected characters along the way. So the characters were fantastic. They were really well formed. You have two brothers. One is sort of a young adult, and the other one's I think around 8. And they set out on this adventure from Nebraska with the intention of getting to San Francisco, but they end up going the other way, to New York, and you find out why it is that they go on this unexpected journey. So yes, loved the characters. I loved the idea. It's got a lot of, I think it's set in the 1950s, so like lots of 1950s charm. It was too long though, and our book club agreed that it was a beautiful book. We really loved the characters. We just wished that it could have been a little bit shorter. And the ending in particular was quite rushed, and like lots happened all in one go. And I think my preference would have been a little bit weeded out at the middle, and a bit more time dedicated to the end to really have some closure with some of the characters. So yeah, I mean, I love A Gentleman in Moscow, who's also written by Amor Towles. I would still like to read Laws of Civility, I think it says. I think that's the name of it. That he also wrote. Acts of Civility, Laws of Civility. You know the one I mean. But yeah, A Gentleman in Moscow is one of my favorite books. This one I don't like it as much as A Gentleman in Moscow, but it just reinforced for me how much I enjoy Amor Towles' writing. Right, you could tell I'm rushing a little bit because I'm filming this in between tasks that I have to do. So the last book that I wanted to cover is the Wood at Midwinter by Susanna Clarke, and this is a very slim picture book that was illustrated by Victoria Sodden. So the thing with this book is I love Piranesi, written by Susanna Clarke, and so I went into this expecting something similar, and it just missed the mark entirely for me. I don't understand what the book was about. It was so short you couldn't get into it. So I gave it 2 stars, I read it as an ebook. The only thing that I enjoyed about it was the illustrations, but I honestly couldn't tell you what the point of the story was. So that was it's such a beautiful book, but it just has, in my opinion, no substance. So I would love to hear if you enjoyed The Wood at Midwinter. What did you enjoy about it? Because perhaps I rushed through it and maybe missed some things, but I just didn't connect to this book at all. And I went so far as to recommend this as a book to read in winter, and now I'm withdrawing my recommendation. I would much rather recommend Piranesi by Susanna Clarke than the book at Midwinter, because bar the illustrations, it just didn't do it for me. So yes, your thoughts would be appreciated. And as always, if you have read any of these books that I mentioned, I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. But yeah, that's my November wrap up. I'm keeping it short and sweet today, and I'll be back soon with what I'm reading in December and a little Christmas message for you all. So I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're enjoying whatever it is that you're reading, and I'll see you soon in a new video. Take care. Bye.